What will you answer to a question about the activities of this person, assuming that he is completely unknown to you? A boxer? A police officer? A trainer? None of it. The profession of this charismatic man never joins with his appearance, because he earns a living by making people laugh. In fact, the activities of this person are much more extensive than just participation in comedy shows. This direction perhaps is the most unconventional in the context of its brutal appearance. You could see him in movies, you could hear his voice while watching sports events, you could watch his podcasts.
Maybe like 5 years, 5 to 10 years.
That's quick.
Or maybe you know him as a TV presenter. American comedian, actor, presenter, and commentator Joe Rogan is rightfully considered the main voice of the UFC and MMA in general. His podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, is one of the most popular and high-paid in the world, and his stand-up performances are adored by thousands of people around the world. What led Joe to such a profession, and how did he manage to achieve such success? Today on the Biographer channel, you will learn all the most interesting things about this charismatic and versatile guy. But before that, do not forget to make the subscription button gray not to miss the next videos. Have you clicked the button? Then we begin. August 11th, 1967. In the small American town of Newark, New Jersey, an Irish woman and an Italian man had a baby boy. His name is Joseph James. The family in which the future superstar grew up quickly split up. When Joseph was 5 years old, his parents separated. All I remember of my dad are these brief, violent flashes of domestic violence. But I don't want to complain about my childhood. Nothing bad ever really happened to me, so I have no reason to hate him, Rogan recalls. The boy continued to live with his mother, who after the divorce from her husband moved with her son to sunny California, San Francisco. And we can say it was there that the career of the future favorite of different generations began. It was while living in California that he became interested in martial arts, signed up for training, and mastered the ancient art. As Rogan himself said, "I was terrified of being a loser, and this sport was the first thing that gave me hope that I would not become one." It was there that he got his first level of skill, and for 4 years, he retained the state lightweight champion's title. However, he didn't manage to stay in California for long. He eventually moved with his mother to Florida and then to Massachusetts. And although Joe had various hobbies as a child, for example, baseball, he was a member of one of the local teams, yet he had a great passion for martial arts such as karate and taekwondo. He showed himself in the ring as a very talented fighter, holding great promise. It would seem that Joe Rogan's career is predetermined, and he found his place in life. And the victory over the middleweight champion once again demonstrated that Joe and martial arts are one. But the plans to build a career as a taekwondo fighter weren't destined to come true. The reason for that was the severe headaches that Joe experienced during training. That's why he had to take a break from his passion for martial arts. Thinking about what to do with his life next, he decided to get a higher education, for which he chose the University of Massachusetts. However, he quickly came to think that studying wasn't for him. Joe left the university after writing a letter of resignation. Unable to continue training and not aiming for higher education, Joe finds himself at a crossroads, not knowing where to go and what to do next. To have a livelihood, he takes on a variety of jobs. He gets a paper route, tries himself as a coach, and even the personal car driver of one of the local detectives. Perhaps the world would have never known Joe Rogan as a charismatic, humorous, and talented man. However, the case changed everything. Joe was a charismatic and bright person from school. He always used lambent humor to communicate with the people around him, among whom there were many of his friends. It was very funny and interesting to communicate with him. Even in his youth, he was a fan of comedy. He was deeply impressed by comedian Richard Pryor's film Love on the Sunset Strip. At one point, one of his friends noticed that Joe really belonged on the stage. After all, his jokes are something remarkable.
3-year-old cat, never been outside. And he sees those squirrels across the street and he's like, I remember. I remember the old way.
The future comedian took the offer to try himself in a new role as a joke, having neither the time nor, most likely, the desire to do so. Nevertheless, he performed on stage. Although it should be mentioned that this is mostly due to his friends, who just insisted on it, noting that Joe's jokes were the real thing, and that they would be successful not only in an inner circle but also with a wider audience. And so it happened. We must say that the career of Joe Rogan as a comedian boomed quite rapidly. After his first performance, he clearly realized that the stage was his second nature, and that there he could prove himself no worse than he showed in the ring in martial arts, and maybe even better. The debut performance of the future superstar took place in the Stitches Comedy Club. The audience liked his performance so much that Joe, being impressed by the audience's delight, created his own humorous show, which he gave the name Joe Rogan Talking Monkeys in Space. After a successful debut, he began to perform regularly in clubs, using notes from his show as the basis of his humorous programs. Soon, he began to earn his first money by performing in strip clubs and at stag parties. And it's hard to say how long Joe would have performed in different clubs if one of his shows hadn't been attended by the well-known producer at the time, Jeff Sussman. It was this acquaintance that significantly influenced Joe's future career. And although he didn't take part in Sussman's projects, nevertheless, it was this acquaintance that opened the doors to the television world for him. In 1990, Rogan moved to New York and initially lived in his grandfather's apartment because money was tight. The comedian quickly gained popularity. And 4 years later, Joe moved again, but this time to Los Angeles, where he got on the MTV comedy show Half Hour Comedy Hour. Joe's career as an actor dates back to 1994 when he first made his big screen debut in the television series Hardball. A dozen episodes were filmed, each 30 minutes long, aired on Fox in the evening. Since the plot of the series tells about baseball players, we can say that Joe actually played himself, although the name of his hero in the project is Frank Valenti. Not for nothing, because in his school years, he was a member of one of the teams. The shooting schedule was a new experience for Rogan, who started working 12 hours a day. Rogan later said, "On paper, it was a great show, until Fox hired a terrible executive producer with a big ego to host the show, and he rewrote it." Simultaneously with filming, Joe became a resident of the Mitzi Shore Club. For the next 13 years, Rogan performed at the club for free. Despite his acting career, Joe continues to indulge the audience with his lambent jokes, which the audience had already fallen in love with.
When she crawls across the floor and she licks milk out of a bowl like a cat. Hello.
The favorite of many took part in the show The Comedy Store many times, and every performance he gave only reinforced his popularity. The first experience of acting was positive, and Joe decided to continue it. The next project in which he showed his talents was the TV series News Radio. It lasted for quite a long time, as many as 4 years from 1995 to 1999. But this didn't prevent Rogan from combining filming in this project with other work. So, for example, in 1997, he, being a TV screen superstar, began to act in the series Just Shoot Me. There is an interesting fact. News Radio brought him even more popularity, making him famous not only in the United States, but also outside the country. However, Joe himself noted that he wasn't particularly interested in this project. Let's focus on his contribution to the cinema. If you consider films in which Joe played a character and not himself, then there are not very many of them. The most prominent of his works are Here Comes the Boom, released in 2012, Zookeeper in 2011, and Venus and Vegas, which was released in 2010. And although Joe Rogan starred in a sufficient number of feature films, yet for the most part, he had episodic roles. For example, in the movie Here Comes the Boom, he took part as a representative of the UFC MMC. As for the other two films, he was not included in the main cast. The film Zookeeper received mostly positive reviews. As for Here Comes the Boom, the audience noted the lack of vulgar humor, agreeing that the comedy was very good for family viewing. But the same cannot be said about the movie Venus and Vegas. It seems that it passed by the audience because there were few reviews and they were contradictory. Someone was delighted and someone was on the contrary. It should be noted that the rating on IMDb is low, 4.1 out of 10 possible points. If we take the fresher movies, then you can get acquainted with his recent work by watching I Am Sam Kinison in 2017. In some films about himself, he acts both as a screenwriter and as a producer. But there are not as many such films, about 12.5. By the way, if you are interested in movies, you can click on the pop-up card and go to our second channel where we talk about everything related to cinema, from an analysis of Tarantino's films to a video about how to shoot bed scenes. Do you want to not only watch a movie but also understand it? Then click the place the arrow points and subscribe. However, back to the biography of Joe Rogan. In 1995, he got a part in the TV series News Radio. Joe takes part in the filming of the project, still performs on stage as a comedian, and continues to train. Yes, despite everything, Joe can't forget about sports. Periodically visits gyms, maintains communication with people of interest, and it is during this period of time that he first learns about the UFC. Under the impression of what he saw and heard, he watches fight after fight, not knowing that soon it will be thanks to the UFC that drastic changes will occur in his life. On one of the most ordinary days in 1997, a phone call rang. At first, when answering, Joe couldn't even believe what was said to him wasn't a joke. He was offered a position as a journalist in the UFC. Can you imagine the emotions of a person who intently watched all the sporting events? Without hesitation, Joe agreed, combining this work with filming in TV series and his own shows, which were also in demand among the public. From 1997 to 2001, Rogan continued to work as a UFC journalist. In 2001, the promotion was bought by the Zuffa Company, and Dana White became the president of the UFC. It was the latter who offered Rogan to become a commentator, but the first time Joe refused, saying that he went to watch fights for the sake of entertainment and drinking. But White still got through to Rogan, appointing him as a commentator. The price of the deal was free tickets for Joe and his friends to all the tournaments. Initially, Joe's tasks were to interview various fighters. Joe remembers his first interview perfectly. Talking once with journalists, he said that he was very nervous. Still, it was his debut, and Mark Coleman helped him make his debut. Nevertheless, despite the excitement, Joe coped with his task just brilliantly. He was soon upgraded from interviewer to fight commentator. After 15 tournaments spent as a commentator, Rogan agreed to earn money for his work. Joe's duet with Mike Goldberg has become truly legendary. It's these two voices that viewers associate with the UFC to this day, although the last was dismissed in 2016.
Count on that?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. Thank
For
you.
you, it's $4.99.
$4.99. I love it. I'll take it. You know what? You are a funny man, by the way.
Thank you. You're funny too. Sometimes unintentionally.
For his work, Rogan was awarded the MMA Personality of the Year award several times. In one of his interviews, Joe noted that it was quite a difficult task to communicate with the fighters who got a knockout. The first time it happened, and Joe didn't know what to expect. He quickly realized that the guy he was talking to, who was Mirko Cro Cop, didn't even know where he was.
I don't think it's a good idea to interview fighters after they've been knocked out.
If you look at Joe's life from the outside, now we are talking exclusively about his career ladder, then this is exactly the case when the term ladder couldn't be more appropriate. It is difficult to find a period in his professional activity during which he would be engaged in something specific. Humorous shows, filming in TV series, commenting. Many tasks were combined and performed simultaneously, and very often one task followed another. Despite the fact that working in the UFC caused him complete delight, he had to refuse this job in favor of filming Fear Factor. By the way, an entertaining story about how Joe landed the role in Fear Factor is worthy of special attention. It may seem strange to you, but working in the UFC, Joe had to pay for rides around the city where the tournament events took place, by himself. Yes, then the mixed martial arts industry was only gaining momentum, and paying for rides for journalists was an unaffordable luxury. In search of an answer to the question of how to get the money, Joe Rogan applied his talent. In 1999, Rogan began making tentative plans to star in his primetime television sitcom The Joe Rogan Show on the Fox channel. And it was another right step in the direction of development and gaining popularity. His shows attracted a huge audience, and Joe became even more famous. It was thanks to this project that he was noticed and invited to the Fear Factor. At first, he refused, as he thought that the network would not broadcast such a program because of its content, but Sussman convinced him to accept. Rogan later said that the main reason he agreed was to get observations of funny situations for his comedic performances. The show increased Rogan's fame nationally, which led to an increase in turnout at his performances. He worked on this program from 2001 to 2006, and then in 2011 and 2012, when the show was launched again. By the way, to host the Fear Factor, he had to leave the UFC. In the time during which he was away from martial arts, he managed to star in various TV series, films, television shows, and many other projects, both authors and not. However, soon after receiving an invitation to the UFC again, he returned to the activity of a commentator. Since 2005, Joseph has focused on stand-up, recording performances for various companies. In 2007, Joe Rogan presented his stand-up concert, Joe Rogan Live in Phoenix, filmed with his own money. With the money he made from television, Rogan hired 2 full-time people to film him and his team on tour and post the web series Joe Show on his website. In May of 2005, Rogan signed a contract with Endeavor Talent Agency. 2 months later, he directed his second special comedy series, Joe Rogan Live. As Joe himself admitted, he was influenced by comedians Lenny Bruce and Bill Hicks. In his comedy, you can see the long-term tradition of Boston comedians. It is frank, sometimes vulgar, and at the same time, very funny. Rogan is not afraid to attack taboo and forbidden topics like religion, politics, or terrorism. By the way, we are very interested in how exactly you found out about Joe. Maybe you watched his podcast, or are you a fan of martial arts, and for you, the UFC is associated with the voice of Joe? Be sure to tell us about it in the comments. We will definitely read everything and like it. On several occasions, Rogan has publicly accused comedians of stealing jokes. In 2007, Rogan got into an argument with comedian Carlos Mencia on the stage of the Los Angeles Comedy Store and accused him of plagiarism. Joe claimed later that because of this incident, he was banned from the Comedy Store and left his agency as a result. He also publicly accused Dane Cook of stealing his jokes and criticized Dennis Leary for stealing jokes from Bill Hicks. Among the large number of projects in which Joe participated, he would also like to highlight the TV show Joe Rogan Questions Everything, which he hosted in 2013 on the Sci-Fi Network. The show consisted of 6 episodes. In it, Rogan, along with co-host Duncan Trussell, learnt paranormal and unusual mysterious objects, such as the existence of Bigfoot and UFOs. The presenters interviewed experts and members of the public who claim unofficial evidence of the existence of unusual phenomena. Various field studies were also conducted to gather evidence. In the series, Joe Rogan takes a skeptical stance. Speaking about the success of Joe Rogan, it is impossible not to notice that he used every opportunity in his career to increase popularity and fame. When the World Wide Web developed to such an extent that it was possible to broadcast video more or less qualitatively, Joe created his next project, a series of podcasts on the Ustream platform, later known as the Joe Rogan Experience. For 6 months, the podcast entered the top 100 on iTunes, and in 2011 began to be broadcast on the popular Sirius XM radio. Initially, Rogan's guests on the podcast were fighters, coaches, and many people from the MMA industry. But later, Joe began to invite various politicians, philosophers, actors, scientists, and inventors. In 2013, Rogan moved the podcast to YouTube when he recorded more than 300 episodes. A famous person was invited and Joe talked to him about all sorts of things. It was very exciting, informative, and interesting. The project collected an incredible number of views. It's hard to even imagine how many and what level of celebrities took part in Joe's project. Mike Tyson, Elon Musk, and Kevin Hart are just some of the few famous personalities involved in his podcast. At the moment, the number of episodes has exceeded 1,300, and the most popular is the episode with American inventor Elon Musk. More than 20 million people listen to Rogan's podcasts every month. To say that Joe's podcast was unique is to say nothing.
There's tobacco and marijuana in there. That's all it is.
Thanks to his experience, humor, and charisma, Joe didn't need any preliminary preparation, scripts, or anything like that. In 10 years, Joe Rogan's podcast has gained such incredible popularity that one of the stream services called Spotify wanted to get the exclusive right to show his videos, paying $100 million for it. Just think about this amount, $100 million for the exclusive right to show just simple dialogues about this and that between Joe and famous people. That's what it means to find your niche in time. The deal with Spotify was struck by Joe Rogan in 2020. Today, Joe's professional engagement is as active as it was in the early years of his career. He stars in films, shows, entertains the audience with humor, and so on. What was the secret to Joe's success? Joe, in fact, took on everything that came to hand. There was commentating, interviewing, his own projects, shooting in shows, TV series, movies, and much, much more. It was the persistence, the endless search that allowed him to become a favorite of a huge audience in the United States and other countries. In 2018, UFC President Dana White praised Joe Rogan's contribution to the UFC. If you're talking about the biggest talent, then Joe is the best of all. One of the reasons we've grown so fast is because Rogan is able to bring you up to speed on the cage itself. He's great. He's really passionate about the sport. You feel it when you listen to him. This isn't a guy who does it for just the money. He really loves what he does. We didn't pay Rogan for the first 12 tournaments he worked on. He did it for free. He also has a perfect and great voice, White said. What about Joe's relationship status? Do you want to know? Well, here everything is standard. He is the complete opposite of Leonardo DiCaprio, who, being a bachelor, chooses only models as his girlfriends. Joe has a wife named Jessica. The family has 3 children, all girls. 2 of them are Joe's own, and another daughter from Jessica's previous marriage, whom he is bringing up as his own. And finally, we have some interesting facts about Joe. His podcast is one of the most popular in the world, with about 200 million views. Before Joe met his wife, he had a brief relationship with another girl, with whom he had a civil marriage. During one of his performances, the owner of the bar kicked Joe out because the audience did not appreciate his humor. Joe is a hunter who prefers to eat meat of animals that he has obtained himself. Yes, Joe Rogan is a very versatile guy. You can't take that away from him. He became an example that if you try yourself in different fields and are not afraid of changes, you will definitely find your dream job. There were similar moments in the biography of Walt Disney. Moreover, it contains a lot of shocking facts that few people know about. For example, the fact that he was sexist and behaved abominably with subordinates. If you click on the video that appeared on the screen, you will find out the whole truth about Disney in our biographical video. Click and watch, you will definitely not regret it.